As many as 500,000 men worked as much as 20 hours a day to build 22,000 fortified positions on land, where, by treaty, no German soldier was supposed to set foot. Hitler had his Siegfried line. He had his equipment. He had his army. Now to unveil the German might and terrorize his intended victims into submission. General staffs all over the world anxiously awaited the report of their military attachés. A would-be peaceful world learned that a vast military power had materialized out of nowhere. A power controlled by one man who tore up treaties as we tear up ticker tape. Satisfied they had created the right sense of fear in the world, the Nazi leaders were now ready to strike. The hour had come. It was time to start conquering Eastern Europe, according to the plan of Hitler's geopoliticians. It was time to win the domination of the heartland. Who would the first victim be? Naturally, the softest, Austria. Bite off just enough not to set the world against you. On March the 12th, 1938, without warning, the German armies marched over the Austrian border. It was really only a full-scale invasion test, and Hitler rode in triumph into Vienna. Even the very name of Austria disappeared from the map, though Hitler had promised earlier to the world. The assertion that it is the intention of the German Reich to coerce the Austrian state is absurd. Why was Austria important to Hitler? It put him on the southern flank of Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia was the key to the control of Eastern Europe.
The German Chancellor Bismarck explained that years ago when he said, "He who would conquer Europe must first hold the bastions of Bohemia." And Bohemia was now part of Czechoslovakia.
But Czechoslovakia was tough. It had a good army. It had good equipment. It had one of the finest munition plants in the world, the Skoda Works, which Hitler wanted very badly. It had incorruptible President Danish. It had a military alliance with France. And France had a military alliance with Britain. Hitler had to move carefully, find excuses to take Czechoslovakia one piece at a time. He found his excuse in the Sudetenland, a portion of Czechoslovakia bordering Germany. Here lived some people of German origin, although they had never been a part of Germany itself. That was Hitler's cue.
Dem deutschen Volk eine neue Idee zu geben.
Completely ignoring the fact that most people who left Germany had done so to get away from things like Hitler, he sprang his pet theory that every person of German blood, no matter where he lived, belonged to the Nazi Reich. Germans or descendants of Germans, often with no more than a drop of German blood in their veins, suddenly learned that they were godlike, not subject to the laws of the land in which they live and to which they owe their allegiance, whether it be Czechoslovakia, Norway, Sweden, China, the United States, or Timbuktu. A According to the Nazis, the German was a special creature who remained forever German, to the 6th and 7th generation, and must take his orders from Berlin. Some people we know of German descent think this is a lot of hogwash. Including 15% of any group like this. But in the Sudetenland, he found some stooges who fell for this bunk. Konrad Henlein was their Bush League Führer. The people of the Sudetenland were told they should be liberated. They were told Hitler was their liberator. The Nazis smuggled over their standard softening up equipment, blackjacks. And when the Czechs were beaten up trying to combat his fifth columnists, Hitler screamed the Germans were being persecuted and threatened war unless he got the Sudetenland. It is the last territorial claim I have to make in Europe. I have assured Mr. Chamberlain, and I repeat it here, that when this problem is solved, there is for Germany no further territorial problem in Europe. We want no Czechs.
To the League of Nations, Foreign Minister Maxim Litvinov announced that Russia stood ready to back concerted action against Germany. But once again, there was to be no concerted action. The Czechs mobilized and closed their borders. The leaders of France and Britain, desperately striving to avoid war, flew to meet the jubilant Axis leaders at Munich. On September 29th, in return for Hitler's guarantee of world peace, Chamberlain and Daladier prevailed upon Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland without a fight. In Czechoslovakia, the Munich Pact was greeted by riots of protest. But Daladier returned to France to be greeted by cheers from a relieved French people. And in Britain, a happy Chamberlain came back declaring he had achieved peace in our time. One of the most tragic and ironic scenes in all history.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Peace. It wasn't peace. The Nazis hadn't merely got 3 million more souls under the German flag. By taking the Sudetenland, they had made Czechoslovakia defenseless. For in this territory lay the natural defenses, the mountain ranges, and a defensive line of forts, considered even stronger than the Maginot Line. Without these fortifications, Czechoslovakia was disarmed, a ripe plum ready to fall into Hitler's lap. Within 6 months of declaring that he wanted no more territory anywhere, he violated the Munich Agreement, marched in, and took the whole of the Czech state, though he had specifically promised, "I have no further interest in the Czechoslovakian state. That is guaranteed. We want no Czechs." Austria and Czechoslovakia were gone without a fight, and Hitler was getting his control of Eastern Europe. Poland was next on the map. The tired old man of Munich now knew that there could be no peace in our time.
If a
an attempt were made to change the situation by force in such a way as to threaten Polish independence, why then that would inevitably start a general conflagration in which this country would be involved.
But after his success at Munich, Hitler was sure that France and Britain would not fight. Here's what one of his spokesmen said. Democracy has no convictions for which people would be willing to stake their lives.
But what about the Russians? The lights began to burn all night in Moscow. British and French military missions arrived to confer with the Soviet government. So did German representatives. And on August 21st, 1939, the world was set on its heels by the announcement of a treaty between the Russians and the Germans in which they agreed not to fight each other. Here were the admitted arch-enemies in a state of apparent friendship. It was too fantastic to make any sense. It didn't. The Germans hoped they could lull Russia into a false sense of security, and the Russians needed time to prepare for the fight they knew was coming. They'd read Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, too, and knew he had his eyes on the rich Russian land. Confident that Russia was safely pigeonholed and that the democracies would not fight, the Nazis started singing their favorite theme song, that all people of German blood belonged to them, and picked Danzig as their excuse for the gobbling up of Poland. Danzig, a free city, self-governing under the League of Nations, was an important seaport at the head of the Polish corridor, Poland's access to the sea. The same old softening up process had gone on here. Local stooges, armed by Germany, began to terrorize the city. Hitler demanded Danzig and the Polish corridor, or else. The people of Poland prepared for the inevitable. Although they knew Britain and France had guaranteed their borders, they also knew those countries were a long way off. Germany's theft of Czechoslovakia had made Poland's strategic position even worse. Except for the Carpathian Mountains, Poland is relatively flat and low-lying. The Vistula is the Mississippi of Poland. It is broad, muddy, and unfordable for most of its length. Its tributaries are formidable streams during certain seasons. But there was a drought, and the streams were so low during the campaign that they could be forded at almost any point by men, trucks, and tanks. Militarily, the Vistula offered the best line of defense. However, making a stand here would have meant surrendering Warsaw and the richest part of the country. The alternative was to accept battle on the border. That was the Polish decision. The Nazi plan was an enormous pincer movement aimed at encircling the mass of the Polish armies. Secondary pincer movements were to encircle any Polish groups which escaped the main trap. During the last 2 weeks in August, the German armies moved toward the Polish border, where they assembled 70 divisions, many of them armored. From a military standpoint, the Poles were hopelessly outclassed by their predatory neighbor. They managed to mobilize barely 30 divisions, made up of infantry or horse cavalry. In two important respects, the difference was staggering. The Nazis, 5,000 modern tanks. Poland, 600 nondescript tanks. The German Luftwaffe, 6,000 modern planes. The Polish Air Force, less than 1,000 of inferior types. The German army secretly made ready. The way of living for the next 1,000 years was to be decided. The fire that had begun in Manchuria and spread through China and Ethiopia and Spain would now blaze around the world. This man made that decision. War. Precisely at dawn on September 1st, without warning, the German Wehrmacht rolled over the Polish border. Before the invasion was 30 minutes old, the planes of the Luftwaffe were over Poland, wiping out the Polish Air Force, most of it caught flat-footed on the ground.